It's an alien.
No kidding. Where?
It's living in America.
I like what they've done with the place.
It's ALF, and now it's everywhere.
He's debonair, and yet fuzzy.
Today, we're going to talk about ALF. And not just the show or character, no. We're going to talk about the show's true legacy to the creative world. But before that, in case you somehow have no idea what or who ALF is, here's a summary.
Once people know ALF exists, he'll be safe.
You want to go public with ALF?
And let's not forget the merchandising possibilities.
From September 22nd, 1986 to March 24th, 1990, the airwaves belonged to this hairy little alien from the planet Melmac. The show was created by puppeteer Paul Fusco and ran for 4 seasons on NBC, totaling 102 episodes. It also included 21 episodes of the animated ALF Tales, which isn't canon and features ALF retelling different fairy tales in typical ALF fashion, plus 26 episodes of ALF the Animated Series. The last episodes of ALF aired on March 24th, 1990, which is, not coincidentally, the day we're releasing this video. There was also a 1996 TV movie sequel with Martin Sheen that no one really talks about for a dozen or so good reasons, but we'll get to that. Even though the show was canceled, the image of ALF was so different, so strongly embedded in the collective American psyche, that we just couldn't let the furry little guy go. He was instantly recognizable across the globe. So, naturally, he took on a life outside of the show.
Are you trying to tell me you're from outer space?
Yeah, but now I live down the block.
ALF's origins begin in 1985. After doing some work for Showtime and connecting with producer Bernie Brillstein and writer Tom Patchett, creator Paul Fusco found himself sitting next to Brandon Tartikoff, the man who made NBC in the must-see TV era of the 1980s and 90s. In an era of safe and some truly awful television, Fusco was proposing a twist on the standard nuclear family sitcom. A caustic, belching, destructive uncle from hell that came in the form of a wisecracking alien who lived in the garage and tried to eat the family cat.
You're kind of small, aren't you? Well, at least you won't claw so much going down.
The pitch to NBC fell on deaf ears. It was a hard concept to sell, especially without imagery, so Fusco, who had stashed a plastic beneath the table, pulled out ALF and made him part of the pitch. Fusco later said, "It looked like he was sitting at the table right next to Tartikoff, and it was just silence. They didn't expect that. Everyone was waiting for you to say something incredibly funny or something in the moment, and ALF didn't really say anything. ALF just kind of looked around the room and picked his nose and wiped it on Tartikoff. The network was sold, all because an alien puppet wiped his nose on an NBC executive." Less than a year after ALF's last episode, in February 1991, ALF appeared on an episode of NBC's Blossom. Mayim Bialik's character, the titular Blossom, gets tricked into a date for homecoming and wants to break it off. That night she dreams that she's gone to heaven, where she meets ALF, who gives her advice. It's important to note here that at no point in the continuity did ALF ever die. This was just a dream.
You're the guardian to the gates of heaven?
Where'd you think I went? Syndication?
In 1996, the previously mentioned 90-minute TV movie called Project ALF aired. The story picks up 6 years after the end of the TV show, with ALF in government custody after being captured in the show's final episode. None of the other series cast members return for the movie. The Tanners are actually mentioned briefly when ALF is told that they're in the Witness Protection Program and have been relocated. He seems to have no interest in finding them. It's important to note here that it's a bit of a surprise response, as even though ALF could seem distant and dismissive at times, he constantly went out of his way for the Tanners and cared deeply about their well-being. Then again, on the surface, the argument could be made that he did seem rather laissez-faire about what eventually happened on his home planet. This seemingly throwaway explanation is probably the only way Project ALF's creators could explain away such a pivotal element of the series, or rather, 4 pivotal elements. As mentioned before, the TV movie features a pre-West Wing Martin Sheen.
And I made up my mind I would seek the truth. I knew that one day I would join the alien task force.
Ironically, Sheen would famously go on to star in The West Wing 3 years later, and at one point in Project ALF, his character asks another military officer if he knows when the New Hampshire primary will be held, which is, of course, where Sheen's West Wing character, Jed Bartlett, originates from and launches his presidential campaign.
Would you happen to know when the New Hampshire primary is?
March or April, I think. Why?
Just curious.
Perhaps ALF is walking the halls of the Bartlett White House, but due to his height, the camera never sees him. Perhaps. ALF's next appearance was on April 30th, 1999, in an episode of The Love Boat: The Next Wave. You all remember that hit show, right? Not The Love Boat. We all know that. The sequel. They did everything but call it The Next Generation. Anyway, in the episode, a young girl whose parents recently got divorced comes to visit her cousin on the ship. The girl hasn't spoken in a month, so another character lends her his ALF doll to keep her company. At one point, a hypnotist prompts the doll to magically come to life. Sure, yeah, that's how that works. After leaving the new Love Boat, May It Never Rise Again, ALF randomly stopped by the Cindy Margolis show on November 3rd, 2000. Fun fact, he actually got that show canceled. Well, okay, not really, but his episode was only a few before it was canceled by the network. Ouch. He also went on to participate in a commercial or two, joined NBC's 75th anniversary special, did some TV Land promo stuff, had a stint on Hollywood Squares, and eventually got a short-lived talk show on TV Land called ALF's Hit Talk Show. Yeah, it was not hit, and we'll get to why in just a moment. And most memorably, ALF returned in Pog form.
But look, I got some cool Pogs. ALF Pogs. Remember ALF? He's back in Pog form.
And there is, of course, the previously mentioned ALF Tales. Each story typically lampoons a film genre and pairs it with a fairy tale, such as the Cinderella episode done as an Elvis Presley film. Yeah, weird. Some episodes featured a fourth wall element where ALF would be backstage preparing for the episode, and Rob Cohen would appear drawn as a TV executive to try to brief ALF on how to improve this episode. One notable example is when Cohen once told ALF, who was readying for a medieval-themed episode, that less than 2% of our audience lives in the Dark Ages. Think about that implication. Just think about it. For decades, the return of ALF was often talked about by people who make such decisions, but ultimately it wouldn't come to fruition. Why? Why would this memorable character only continue to exist as a cameo? The answer is actually really simple and is part of ALF's real legacy. And that legacy was that ALF was weird. Like really weird. Not just as a character, not just as a show, but as a universe. ALF's true gift to the creative community and anyone with an oddball dream was the show's weird world building.
Tell that to my cousin, Pretty Boy Shumway. He grew up on the south side of Melmac, the baddest part of the planet. If he didn't like your shoes...
This is what was missing from ALF's hit talk show, the weird. The real weirdness of ALF was in his life, his history. These shows made no mention of Melmac or his experiences. They turned him into, well, a person. There was always a fish out of water element to ALF, but it wasn't his experience. It was his world. ALF worked best when everything else was normal in not appearance, but in behavior, expectation, and relation to other conventional elements of the world. When ALF first aired, it broke the mold. It was different, and not just because the lead character was a furry puppet, but because half the stuff that came out of the character's mouth barely made any sense, at least to us. Yes, he was an alien from an alien culture, but that culture never broke from itself, and it had a mostly lasting continuity right up until the end.
But expect the unexpected. Wildly erratic behavior, personality shifts. The main thing is that I'll do anything to get out of that cage and get my hands on a cat.
The 1980s were a trip. There was a lot of creative experimentation, especially in people's appearances, wardrobe, music, television, movies, and toy stores. The 1960s and 70s represented a shift in American culture, but the 1980s is when that shift hit its freaking stride. MTV was a massive hit, and day after day, American youth culture was bombarded by new visuals and new sounds. Yo-yos started lighting up, koosh was a thing, slap bracelets were cutting wrists left and right, Polly Pocket moved into the neighborhood and started blocking the throats of young children, jelly shoes attempted a global takeover, which thankfully failed, and the hair crimping. My God, the hair crimping. Just why? So much. All these strange and new trends started paving the way for ALF, and his competition on TV at the time, a heck of a lot of people that all looked the same, doing a lot of repetitive, formulaic things. So here comes Paul Fusco, walking right into a pitch at NBC, wiping alien boogers on executives, and just like that, ALF was born. And really, when the 80s died, so did ALF. The strange new toys and shows we were seeing all the time started to stabilize, to become normal, commonplace. And to most viewers, so did the appearance of ALF. But this isn't about the cancellation of ALF. This is about the show's world building. So let's dive right in. And if you want to talk about ALF some more, please do so in the comments below. Flood it with all that sweet, sweet ALF love.
Oh, hey, that feels good. Could you do my shoulders?
Now, the very basics first. ALF is not ALF's name. The character's actual birth name was Gordon Shumway. That's right. The alien's birth name, not the actor who voiced him or the puppeteer who moved him, but his actual in-universe birth name was Gordon Shumway. Perfectly mundane in all the weirdest ways. Gordon Shumway is a name we'd associate with a shoe salesman or an accountant, not an alien.
Hi there. Gordon Shumway, nice to meet you. Interested in a new Buick?
An exotic alien world of possibility and wonder, and the alien's damn name is Gordon Shumway? Right off the bat, that should tell viewers what kind of show they're in for and how expectations will no longer be met.
Well, that's a little far-fetched, but it could work.
ALF was the nickname given to him by the Tanner family. No, not that family. The other Tanner family. Willie, Kate, Lynn, and Brian. ALF stood for Alien Life Form. Aside from the Tanners, there were a few common guest stars, but the most common was their neighbor, Mrs. Oakmanek, played by Liz Sheridan, who later went on to play Jerry Seinfeld's mother.
Doesn't like you? How could anyone not like you?
Mrs. Oakmanek represented the show's only version of a constant threat. She wasn't evil or nefarious in any way, but she was the neighbor and posed a risk of seeing and possibly even exposing ALF. She was the modern equivalent of bewitched Gladys Kravitz, always nosing around, suspecting that something just isn't quite right with the neighbors. Now onto the actual world of the world building. ALF's home planet is called Melmac. So what's Melmac like? Well, the first thing to know about Melmac is that it is both the name and the substance out of which the planet is made of.
What?
Melmac. That was the name of my planet. It's also what it was made out of.
We can't seem to find Melmac on the periodic table of elements, but Gordon Shumway assures us that Melmac is real. The second thing to know about Melmac is that, well, it's gone. Destroyed. Yeah.
Are you trying to tell me that you can't go back to Melmac?
It exploded. This was my street.
And ALF, much like Superman, is the last of his kind. Well, almost last of his kind.
Hi, cutie.
Melmac was located in the Aldente Nebula in the Andromeda Galaxy, so not in the Milky Way, and located 6 parsecs past the Hydra Centaurus supercluster. We pointed out on a star chart, but we're not Betty Hill, so hell if we know. Inhabitants of the Melmac were called, you guessed it, Melmacians. They're short and furry, have remarkable longevity, and multiple stomachs. The nose is also worth mentioning. You may have noticed it. Melmac was very much like Earth, but it had 2 moons and was shaped like an egg. Melmac had green skies and blue grass, and it orbited a purple sun. Sometimes, depending on the season, ALF tells the Tanners that Melmac can have an orange sky and green clouds.
Now, how about fixing my spaceship so I can get my heavy, hairy body out of here?
Okay, that's kind of typical alien, weird world building, right? Pretty par for the course. Well, that's where it ends. Melmac's national pastime was mining for yogurt. So, here's the first real weird world building block in our exploration. Yogurt, which is an organic processed substance here on Earth, made from an animal byproduct, is on Melmac mineable. It is in the planet.
Hey, this yogurt is really something, huh? And it's non-fat. I've been waiting for something like this my whole life, and it's finally here.
Do creatures burrow into the land, leave behind a dairy byproduct, pasteurize and process it? We just don't know. It's more likely, probably, somehow, naturally occurring on Melmac. Gross, but the Melmacians seem to love it.
Alf, where did you get those?
Melmac. I usually buy wild cherry, but all they had left was slug.
Oh.
That might explain why the planet was once the intergalactic convention site for the Federation of Incredibly Strange Food Groups. On a personal note, I want to go to that convention. Wouldn't have the dirt yogurt, but I'm sure something would catch my eye. Actually, where have I seen mineable yogurt before? Modern-day Melmacians were, in fact, not native to Melmac. While we don't know where modern Melmacians originally came from, we do know that the planet Melmac itself was discovered 23,000 years ago when Harold Twink accidentally took the wrong exit for Neptune. That's our Neptune, an entire galaxy away, a long distance between off-ramps. A year on Melmac consisted of 364 days, including Sundays. 386 days if Sundays were included. The 12 Melmacian months were Harble, Tarble, Gruff, Kilmerl, Gag, Oring, Barp, Twangle, Fanfan, Nothinganger, Anerba, and Fibble.
Before you get up for that final snack, I want you to know I'll be right back.
The planet itself was destroyed on Gary 1st, 45-7, Nathan Banger 28th, 45-7 on the Melmacian calendar, which is October 28th, 1985 on the Earth calendar. Yep, the planet's destruction was due to nuclear war, a typical fear in 1980s America. Gordon was off-world at the time, surviving the apocalypse, and after his home planet exploded, he wandered through space for almost a year before arriving on Earth. Some of the flora and fauna that ALF stated existed on Melmac are cats, jaffies, Melmacian cockroaches.
You're angry at the world. I understand that. You probably didn't get enough love as a larva.
Melmasaurs, orbit gnats, slurf slugs, water trumps, vespas, vestas, blood pansies, dinnersaurs, and bula baseball fish. Other notable creatures include salesman dinosaurs. These are the creatures that inhabited Melmac before Melmacians. Their actual species name is not known, but ALF says they were a cross between dinosaurs and salesmen. Again, weird freaking world building as in our cultures. Salesman is a job, not a biological designation of genus. But on Melmac, these large lizards were apparently always trying to make a sale. The last bit of nature-based world building worth noting here is the living bread, the origin of which apparently was the result of a baker making bread, but his yeast was mislabeled, and it actually contained irradiated crutonium. And that naturally made giant, living, mutated bread, which we assumed terrorized Melmac with the fury of 1,000 salesman dinosaurs. Also, why is there irradiated crutonium in a bakery? No idea, but that's part of the beauty of ALF's world building. We're so accustomed to the bizarre at this point that we just accept it. And in case you were wondering, the living bread was destroyed by the Mexorcist, which we can only assume is a Melmacian exorcist.
Today's word is obvious.
On Melmac, the economic values of various objects work just about as the exact opposite of Earth values, with foam, bronze, and carpet being the equivalent of gold on Earth, which had absolutely no value on Melmac. What we don't ever see is the way in which this currency is actually transferred. Is foam traded in bottles? Or perhaps carpet is cut into coin shapes or notes of value? It's anyone's guess. We also don't know why carpet is so valuable on Melmac, given that it's not a grown or found substance, it's made. So if the materials carpet is made of are somewhat common, it would be the finished product of carpet that has the value, which must mean that there's value in the process. Melmacians are furry creatures, perhaps due to their hair always getting in the way. On top of their somewhat limited digital dexterity, they just couldn't easily create carpet without getting their own fur caught up in the process. This is just a guess, of course, as trying to figure out the reason behind half of Melmacian culture would drive anyone mad.
Well, there is this teeny-weeny possibility that just maybe... Oh no!
Now, while a lot of Melmac's government and laws may seem somewhat familiar to us Earthlings, they're still pretty out there. ALF tells us that Melmac was run by the Imperial Intergalactic Trade Federation, which was itself composed of an Imperial Senate. So there are other planets with other life forms. More Melmacians? Maybe. Something just as weird but different? Most definitely. Something as boring as in-universe humans? Possibly. In the years before Melmac was destroyed, nuclear war broke out. We're never told if it's between the Federation's member planets or with an outside entity, but as a result, the Imperial Federation started more strictly enforcing the laws of the surrounding planets. Melmac, Alvin, Alvin Heights, and Dave. Yep, those are the planets. Dave was probably the name of a planet, but given how the ALF universe works, Dave might very well be an entity that had its own sovereignty. This is Dave. The Federation later signed the Intergalactic Imperious Constitution, but due to the destruction of Melmac, the Federation enacted a new Imperious Constitution. ALF did not go into any real details about his new government document. That might seem a bit eye-glossingly familiar, government is rarely fun, but when it comes to laws, well, Melmac had a number of laws which terrestrial humans might have found, written by drunk people?
It's not soda pop, it's beer.
You're about out of Coors.
Among them were the following. It was illegal for Melmacians to name their children after wood. The biggest cause of arrest on Melmac was tickling a barber. To operate a gas grill, most Melmacians had to own a license, which probably makes sense as Melmacians seem to be pretty, well, flammable. Dancing with a mailman was also considered to be a federal offense. Melmacian water trumps were illegal to own in a populated area, especially one with a lake or ocean. Any violation of that law would result in severe penalties, either a possible life prison sentence or the death penalty.
Hi, I'm Gordon Shumway. Is this Suite 14?
Waving at a halibut was against the law, possibly punishable by death, and for whatever reason, on Melmac, it was illegal to juggle your cousins. The best part about the world building here is that we have no idea about the incidents that prompted these laws. None. The writing team would rather us fill in those blanks by ourselves. And given that we've been primed to already think of the bizarre when it comes to this show, we can probably come up with some reasons, and weird ones too, because that's what we'd have come to expect at this point from the show's world.
Willie, now you're grasping at straws.
ALF is a show that asks not just for your attention, but your imagination. It wants you to give yourself over to it, to accept that what's weird to you is normal elsewhere. It's not weird in the way a show like Twin Peaks or Midnight Gospel are weird. No, ALF was the first pop culture weird. It paved the way for popular shows like Rick and Morty, Family Guy, and even Gravity Falls. It took mundane things and made them bizarre simply by associating them with other mundane things they normally have no association with. ALF freed us from convention, and it did so without breaking from its own internal logic. As creators, we owe a lot to ALF, and Paul Fusco, for paving the way for the out there, bizarre, strange, weird, and wonderful to be welcomed into the mainstream. We'll end on some very recent news. As of February 24th, 2022, Shout Factory announced it acquired the digital distribution rights to ALF. The multi-year teaming provides Shout Factory and its multi-platform streaming service Shout Factory TV with exclusive US rights spanning digital, broadcast, and home entertaining packaged media. Included are the 102 episodes of the live-action series, plus 26 episodes of ALF the Animated Series, 21 episodes of the animated ALF Tales, plus TV movie project ALF. The company plans to develop new ALF-related content and launch digital media initiatives and domestic syndication in streaming, electronic sell-through, and video on demand.
I even have an old music video I shot. Check it out.
Shout Factory will leverage what it calls unparalleled access to archived content and the original broadcast masters from Alien Productions in mounting an aggressive rollout of pop culture content related to ALF later this year. So, whatever comes next, here's to you, ALF. We hope that when you next find your way back into the spotlight, you bring all your freaking weird world-building wonder with you.
I'd like to thank the American people who have responded with their support through what has been an exciting first season. Think they bought that?